If Joe Biden falls, does anyone hear it? Does anyone see it? Does anyone talk about it? Not really. Joe Biden took a terrible, terrible tumble on Friday. No joke. Take a look. Bam. Bam. And then splat, essentially. This is a big deal. This is a big deal. And political reporters, they love this kind of stuff, all right? They really don't like policy. They really don't like the minutia of government, but they love optics and they love gossip and they love, well, something like this. And they ignored it for the most part. The mainstream media took no interest in this. On all the Sunday shows I watched, I had a habit I watch. No mention of Joe Biden, a 78-year-old man struggling to get on board Air Force One. Now, you could say, or they would say, well, that's not a substantive issue and we don't care about such things. That's not true, first of all. They do care about such things. And also, it actually is a substantive issue, and it could ultimately affect all of us. He is 78 years old, and guess what? When you take a tumble and you're north of 65, it's a big deal, potentially. According to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, Joe Biden's favorite agency, falls are the leading cause of injury-related deaths among persons aged 65 and over. So it is a legitimate news story. It legitimately could affect Joe Biden's health. It was legitimately a story when Hillary Clinton took that tumble. Actually, she didn't take a full-fledged tumble. The Secret Service was there to catch her. Remember this? This is on the September 11th, 2016, and she could not get into her own vehicle, which looked suspiciously like an ambulance painted black. Anyway, when that happened, the mainstream media, appropriately, and the conservative media, by the way, went nuts. There were headlines coast to coast, internationally actually, about her health situation. What's going on there? What could be happening? Now, when you're even older and you take a tumble, I think it's a bigger situation than that. She was a candidate back then, a lot younger than Joe Biden. Joe Biden, 78 years old, took a fall. And by the way, this is his second fall in just a couple of months. Do you remember during the transition, I guess we'll call it, when Joe tangled with his dog and he had to wear a little special cast on, yeah, there he is pointing to it. This is, I believe, back in December. He had a boot on his leg. Now, we were suspicious about this because, well, Joe Biden's story didn't really make sense. He told this long story about how he was playing with his dog in the alley of the house, on the second floor of his house. Who has an alley up there? Anyway, this is how he wrapped up the story. Again, it was the dog's fault.
And what happened was that he slid on a throw rug, and I tripped on the rug he slid on. That's what happened.
Okay. He also pulled the dog's tail. Anyway, so Joe takes plenty of tumbles, 2 in 3 months, is it, that we know about? All right. Again, this is an important issue, but it's not the most important issue. What's that right now? Probably the border situation, which we know is totally out of control. The Homeland Security Secretary says the border is secure, the border is closed, but that's not the case. Let's take a look at some of the numbers, okay? We have an issue. Everybody knows it. They're denying it, okay? This is far worse than anything that happened under President Trump, who worked and succeeded in fixing most of the problem. All right, but it's such a burning issue. Everyone's talking about it. It clearly requires leadership. Joe Biden is going to go to the border sooner or later.
Are you thinking of going to the border?
At some point, I will, yes.
At some point, why should the president go when he's got his Department of Homeland Security secretary on it? Have you seen this guy? We're getting a good look at Alejandro Mayorkas. And I don't think he's up to the job. Sorry.
These are vulnerable children to address their needs, and we can do so in a safe and orderly manner. It takes time because the entire system was dismantled. We are working on it, and we will succeed because that is what we do. This is what we do. We know how to do it. We have dealt with surges in the past, and the men and women of the Department of Homeland Security will succeed. When I say it takes time, I mean it, because we're dealing with a dismantled system. And we did not have the ordinary, safe, and just transition from one administration to another. But we are still in the midst of the pandemic. There is central CDC controls in place, and Border Patrol agents are focused on operations, on securing the border, on addressing the needs of vulnerable children. We are not focused on ride-alongs right now.
Strangely smug and self-satisfied with the smiling when he wasn't regurgitating stale talking points. President Trump issued a statement yesterday. It's a beauty. He called this pathetic, clueless performance of Secretary Mayorkas on the Sunday shows, and he said it was a national disgrace. His self-satisfied presentation in the middle of the massive crisis he helped engineer is yet more proof he is incapable of leading the DHS. He'll have more on that when he drops by. Keep in mind, President Trump went to the border relentlessly throughout his presidency, starting in 2017. He went there a lot. We all knew it was his priority, and he made it his priority. And you know what? You got to lead on the ground sometimes. You got to get right in there. And he was. He clearly was. All right, moving on. Yeah, enemy of the people. It was said a lot by President Trump about the media. And, you know, at first I was taken aback by it. No, not anymore. He was onto something. He called it right. He called it right. Mainstream media, too often, are actively harming our culture and our country with a great big assist from Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. Talking about what happened in Atlanta, the horrible shootings there, and how they have been distorted, misrepresented by the mainstream media. Now, they are getting their cues from Joe and Kamala.
Racism is real in America, and it has always been. Xenophobia is real in America, and always has been. Sexism, too.
It's been a year of living in fear for their lives, just to walk down the street. Grandparents are afraid to leave their homes. Small business owners targeted and gunned down. Attacks on some of the most vulnerable people in our nation, the elderly, low-wage workers, and women.
This is fear-mongering, and they're doing it for political reasons. They are not describing the country that you and I know. They are, though, going back to their old playbook, and actually it's not that old. You know, Donald Trump did very well with African Americans in the 2016 election and in the 2020 election, so they did everything they could to undermine that. That was a big reason, one of them, why last summer happened. And now they see how well Donald Trump has done with Asian Americans. Traditionally, they voted Democratic. Donald Trump started to change that in a big, big way. We are having a silly conversation about what happened at those facilities in Atlanta to avoid a more important one, perhaps an uncomfortable one. Now, in all the coverage that I've been watching, I haven't heard anyone talk about what may or may not have been happening inside at least one of those facilities. When law enforcement sees something like this at a massage facility in a place like Atlanta, let's put it on the screen, please. I think this was the Gold Spa, open 24 hours. That's indicative that potentially sexual activity is happening inside. That's what the suspect who's in custody has said. What happened was an absolute horror and should never have happened. But if we want to pretend that this is only about race, that some other issues, some uncomfortable to talk about, sex addiction, like this person has apparently told law enforcement, we can skip all that and instead try to score political points. That's what Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are doing. And the media following it and fanning the flames.
Thousands across the U.S. gathered at vigils and rallies over the weekend to honor the victims of the deadly Atlanta area spa shootings. From New York to Washington, D.C. to Denver to Pittsburgh, many spoke out against hate crimes targeting Asian Americans.
I don't like hate crimes targeting anybody, any group, including Asians, blacks, white people. But is that the heart of what happened in Atlanta? According to some of the folks most affected by it, they say no. Also, by the way, the FBI, local law enforcement, they're all saying race was not a motive here. But I want to bring you to an interview I did with a man named John Michaels. Now, John lost his brother, Paul Andre Michaels, who was a 54-year-old handyman working at one of those facilities. We had Mr. Michaels on the show on Friday, and he summarized what he's been thinking lately.
This is the drive-by media creating a narrative that is not correct. I wish they would stop, think about what they're doing, and quit stoking racial division in this country. We don't need it. We need to come together as a nation of people from all different backgrounds. Joe Biden talks about unity, and this is far from unity. The porn issue is an epidemic in this country. If you look at the numbers, and especially during the lockdown and the pandemic, it is in a very, very intense epidemic, and it destroys the basic dignity of the human person. And that's the real issue that needs to be addressed in this, not the race issue.
That's John Michaels. He is 52 years old, of Michigan. Again, he lost his brother, Paul Andre Michaels, 54, in the shooting in Atlanta. John works in the shipping department at a tool and die company in Michigan. I tell you, you can learn more and understand more in watching Mr. Michaels for just a few minutes and listening to him than you can in a year of consuming mainstream media nonsense.
You just watched Newsmax TV, America's fastest growing cable news channel, now in more than 70 million homes. You can get Newsmax TV on your cable system or check your cable guide. And if your system doesn't carry Newsmax, call them, tell them you want Newsmax TV, because we're real news for real people.